Okay, close your eyes for just a second. I want you to imagine you're 8 years old again. You've just brought home the absolute best grades you've ever had. Your heart is literally racing with excitement. You walk up to your parents, looking up at them, just hoping to hear 3 simple words. I'm proud of you. But they never come.
So let's dive into this. Why is it that so many incredibly successful, highly functional adults are still, deep down, waiting to hear a validation that never came in their childhood? Why do some parents struggle so deeply to just say, I'm proud of you? Well, the answer really isn't as simple as just assuming they didn't love you. The roots go a whole lot deeper.
The emotional stakes of waiting for these 3 simple words are massive. For a lot of kids, these words were basically a mirage. You can almost physically feel that childhood excitement fading right into a knot in your stomach when a moment of triumph is met with something like, well, you could have done better, or even worse, just complete and utter silence. And years pass, you graduate, you get a job, you build this whole life, but somehow you're still waiting for those words.
Which brings us to part 1, the silence that stays and how it becomes a lifelong echo.
Think about it like this. Kids rarely remember every single toy or expensive gift they got. What they retain, permanently, is how they were made to feel by what was, or what wasn't, said to them. For a lot of parents, the love itself wasn't missing at all, the expression of it was. They firmly believed that putting food on the table, keeping a roof over your head, and funding your education was the absolute ultimate expression of love. They really thought that providing for your survival needs was enough. But here's the thing, providing doesn't build a child's internal emotional foundation. For that, they needed words of affirmation.
And that brings us to a super common assumption parents make, right? My child already knows I love them. But here's the reality check that psychology gives us. Kids cannot hear assumptions. They only hear words. When a parent assumes their actions are speaking loud enough, but the actual words of pride never arrive, that silence isn't just empty space. It actively begins to shape the child's entire identity.
Let's move to part 2, the parents who never heard it either, and this whole generational cycle.
To really understand where this silence comes from, we actually have to travel back a generation and look at a pretty uncomfortable truth about our parents' own childhoods. This is where the psychology of intergenerational patterns effectively removes the blame. These are behaviors passed from one generation to the next, entirely under the radar. I mean, many of our parents grew up in homes where survival mattered infinitely more than emotions. Fathers worked but rarely hugged. Mothers sacrificed everything but rarely spoke words of affection. They repeated this silence with you not because they didn't care, but simply because no one ever taught them another way.
Look at how this builds across eras. It's like a chain reaction. You start with a past generation focused purely on survival. Then that morphs into the present parents. They provided better resources, but they still lacked that verbal expression, because love for them was modeled through responsibility, not conversation. And finally, that generational ripple effect lands right on the current child, who is now left continuously chasing an approval they just can't quite secure.
Which leads perfectly into part 3, the unending search for approval and chasing what's missing.
So this inherited silence fundamentally changes who a child becomes. They grow into the adult overachiever. They become these extreme perfectionists. They develop this truly paralyzing fear of failure. They'll work harder than everyone else in the room, and yet they never actually feel like it's enough. Why? Because they're secretly using success as a desperate tool. Whether they become doctors, build massive businesses, or crush every goal they set, it is all just a subconscious strategy to finally earn that missing approval.
But ask yourself this, why doesn't it ever feel like enough? You land the massive promotion at work, you hit the huge revenue goal, you get the fancy, prestigious title. People are literally applauding you. Yet after every single achievement, that hollow feeling comes creeping right back. Well, the research tells us exactly why. It's because absolutely no amount of adult achievement can ever go back in time and replace the specific words a child desperately needed to hear years ago. You're trying to fill a childhood emotional void with an adult professional victory, and the math just doesn't work.
Now for part 4, when silence becomes a language, creating a dangerous cycle.
This cycle gets profoundly dangerous when an adult brain's entire emotional framework is built around a void. Picture this. Someone compliments you. They pull you aside at work and tell you that you are just amazing at what you do. Your immediate reaction? You completely reject it. You don't believe it, or you immediately assume they're just being polite, or maybe they want something from you. Why do we do this? Because your mind is subconsciously still waiting for your parents' voice. This inability to accept a compliment isn't a personality weakness at all. It's simply the human brain defaulting to the voices it heard most in childhood.
Because honestly, the loudest voice is silence. The voices we hear most in our youth become the voices we carry into adulthood. And when that validation was totally absent, that very absence becomes the dictator of our self-worth. The silence speaks louder than any applause you could ever possibly receive.
But here is the good news. In Part 5, Breaking the Silence, healing begins with you.
I really want to shift the focus here to the future, because the most important takeaway from this explainer is that every single cycle can be broken. Healing doesn't have to start with your parents suddenly changing. It begins with you. And there's a huge difference between excusing a behavior and explaining a behavior. Understanding that your parents' silence came from their own unhealed pain and their own childhood environment does not excuse the pain it caused you, not at all, but it does explain it. And that explanation allows you to objectively step out of the cycle. You can finally see the machine for exactly what it is and choose to unplug it rather than just sweeping all that pain under the rug.
Every child deserves to know, not guess, but absolutely, unquestionably know that they are loved and valued. One day, if you haven't already, you're going to face a choice with the next generation. You can repeat that comfortable, familiar silence, or you can choose to replace it with 3 simple words. Words that cost absolutely nothing to say, but have the power to change the entire trajectory of a human life.
I want to leave you with this final thought today. Sometimes the smallest sentence becomes the biggest memory. So, are you ready to give the next generation the greatest gift possible? Because the most profound thing you can ever do is to look at someone you care about and speak the exact words you spent your whole life waiting to hear.